What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video, and we just finished up the first set of regional championships with the biggest one being held in Prague, hosted by Fanfinity, and it is the first of the many major modern RCs that we're going to be seeing, and this being the first major modern tournament that we've had in paper since the bannings of the One Ring and Amphiraptor along with Jengatha, and the unbanning of Mox Opal, Faithless Looting, Green Sun Zenith, and of course Splinter Twin. Some interesting things that I want to point out in this video. We're going to be looking at the day one metagame. We're going to be looking at conversion rates and exactly what those meta percentages kind of looked like going into day two, the top 8, and kind of the conclusions that we can draw from this, and some questions that are definitely going to be answered going into the future regional championships, and kind of what we can expect, and maybe even this giving us a snapshot of what we could expect at the American regional championships, with the first one being, I think, on February 9th. I mean, we are just a few weeks away from that event. But of course, before we get into any of that stuff, really quickly, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me where we talk a lot about the modern and standard formats as well as some other longer form content, we like breaking down some of the major tournaments going on in Magic, whether it's the regional championships, Pro Tour, World Championships, anything like that, we cover it here. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, please consider subscribing and ring that notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. Of course, leaving a like on the video as well helps out with the algorithm. And I want you to comment down below if at any point you are surprised by any of the results that you're seeing here, or maybe what you need, what you think needs to change in the modern format. If it's in a healthy place, does it need any more bannings, or maybe even some other unbannings and stuff? Please let me know in the comments down below. Of course, on top of all that, if you go in the description down below, I have a link to my Discord server. You can go join the Discord server over there. Follow me on Twitch over at my Twitch link down there below. And finally, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. It's a monthly subscription service where you can go and rent cards for various different decks, such as the ones that you're going to be seeing today, or maybe some of the other formats that you're a fan of, and then you can go play those in leagues, challenges, and even in their monthly tournament series that can qualify you for their end of the year invitational. I want to thank Manatraders for sponsoring the video, and if you use my code in the description down below, you'll get 5% off your monthly subscription. So thank you to them, and let's go ahead and look at the day one metagame breakdown for the Regional Championship Prague. So here we have the day one metagame breakdown for the regional championship in Prague. Probably surprising to nobody at the top 4 decks here. We have Boros Energy at 25.7%, 258 players out of the 1,003 deck lists all submitted Boros Energy. And this isn't just like a mix of Boros and Mardu Energy, because you can actually see over on the right side, Mardu Energy has its own like little archetype square there. But, you know, just to note that they are separate. Boros Energy, the most played deck in this tournament, and it's not even close. Dimir, Oculus, and Grinding Breach are the second most played decks, and if you doubled the amount of people that would have registered those decks, they would not even, they would barely come close to Boros Energy. They still wouldn't have as much of a metagame share as Boros Energy. So definitely crazy there that in this first major tournament, and of course the bans directly, you know, meant to impact Boros Energy. I mean, losing the One Ring affected a lot of decks, but Boros Energy was also the most played deck, and it was one of the best cards in the format. And then also getting rid of Amphiraptor as well to maintain the ability to play essentially the energy deck, but not having this free payoff card. Turns out it doesn't matter. First major modern tournament that we've seen in a while, especially one as big as Prague. Again, 1,003 players, over a quarter of the field playing Boros Energy. Dimir, Oculus, Grinding Breach at 11.4% each. Eldrazi Ramp at 9.5%, just a little bit behind Grinding Breach and Dimir, Oculus. 19 less registered decks between the two. And then we just have a major drop-off. I mean, I guess we had the first drop-off from Energy to Oculus and Breach, but we have another drop-off where we go down to 3.5%, and even 3.4%, we have 35 players registering Golgari, Yawgmoth, and Orzhov Blink, and then 34 playing Tameshi Belcher, 28 on Amulet Titan, 27 on Ruby Storm, 19 on Mardu Energy, 19 on Domain Zoo, and 225 other archetypes. Now, this doesn't mean that there's 225 different individual decks that don't fall, there's not 225 individual different decks, but there are archetypes in that 225 that just don't actually equal here, because I'm sure that somebody will have the full breakdown of every single deck list that was played. But I think this gives us a pretty good idea of what the potential regional championship metagames are going to look like going forward, especially when we get to the United States Regional Championship, which is going to be happening in early February. Some initial thoughts of this. Again, Boros Energy, just seeming to be one of the best decks to play in the format. I said that it was probably one of the easiest decks to pick up and play. I think that there's a little bit less, if you get the sequencing down and everything like that, I think Oculus and Breach, you're being pretty reactive, where Boros Energy, for the most part, is going to want to do its thing a lot of the time, and we'll definitely have to pick and choose the spots where it wants to be interactive, and it also at times gets to kind of add to its board while also getting to be interactive, just because of how cheap its spells are. So really, when you get your sequencing and stuff down, I think Boros Energy becomes very easy to play, and you're just kind of trying to gauge maybe necessarily what you're trying to do in certain matchups, how to sideboard and things like that. Oculus, Breach, I feel like are decks that you are very reactive to what your opponent is doing, and again, the fact that they were the two most played decks, or rather the tied for the second most played deck of the format, is pretty interesting. Because they have been pretty close. Grinding Breach, of course, getting Mox Opal in the unbannings, and has just kind of taken the deck from 0 to 100. Doesn't have to play like Ragavan in the main deck. It just gets to play like Tameo, and gets to play Emery, and then be able to just make a ton of mana early on, and then be able to win games very effectively on turn 2, where Oculus is kind of this interactive deck that does have kind of an unfair button, while it's not nearly as unfair as what some of the other decks are doing, and not necessarily game ending when they do it. It does end up snowballing relatively quickly, and you're having to find ways to fight back against a deck that's going to be able to counter your best spell seemingly almost every turn while applying a ton of pressure through the air. Eldrazi Ramp is a deck that I didn't really give it a lot of credit for. I think it was going to be pretty high up in the metagame, but that was really going to be it. Not like it was going to necessarily be a bad deck, but I didn't think it was as good as any of the other 3 decks here, and we'll find out here in a minute that I was unwholly wrong with this. So that's the day 1 metagame breakdown. Day 2, have here, someone left this in the comments section of my video, or on my community post, where you can go over there, kind of check out things that I post for what's going on with the regional championships, major events, polls, things like that. So go ahead and check out the community tab there. But of the 1,003 players that were registered for RC Prog and ended up playing in RC Prog, only 131 made it to day 2, and you needed to have a record of, I believe, 6-2 or better, 18 match points. There was someone that actually made it at 5-0-3, which I thought was pretty interesting. I don't know if you can actually make top 8 with that record. I'd imagine that you probably could, but you'd end up having to play like every game, because at that point you can't take any more draws. But something really cool to just kind of point it out that I had noticed very early on in the day 2 broadcast. But here we have kind of like in order some of the decks that we have here. So we have Boros Energy. It was 25% of the metagame on day 1, ended up being 27% of the metagame, about 27.5%. So it's up a little bit. Dimir Oculus with a very, very, very big fall off here. Only 3.82% of the day 2 metagame after being 11.4 on day 1. Absolutely abysmal. Grinding Breach, the teamer builds and the 4-color builds are kind of thrown in here. 16.03% of the day 2 metagame, up from 11.4. We have Eldrazi also at 16.03%, up from 9.5%. Golgari Yawgmoth at 3.05%, just slightly down, but Orzhov Blink is a little bit up at 6.1%, with 8 players making day 2. Tameshi Belcher at 5.4%, 7 players making it into day 2. We have Amulet Titan and Ruby Storm putting 2 and 1 respectively, which is obviously down considerably from here. You were just not having a good time if you're a Ruby Storm player. Mardu Energy ended up being 1.53% of the metagame, with 2 decks making day 2, one of them being 8-0 at the end of the day, and Domain Zoo at 5 of 131, 3.82% of the meta, and overall from the other decks, 19 of 131 being 14.5% of the metagame. So just from this here, kind of like the conversion rate, and what we're going to see when we get to the standings, this seems like it's a pretty accurate snapshot of the metagame. I think Dimir Oculus is definitely going to take a huge hit, definitely not having the tournament a lot of people would have expected it to have. I thought it would have been a very good deck to play. I didn't actually have it in my initial predictions of winning a regional championship, and that might have actually been correct considering that I think going forward, this deck is going to see a considerable hit in its metagame share just by, again, having this abysmal kind of results. And we're going to kind of move into the Boros Energy versus Grinding Breach versus Eldrazi Ramp. I'll be honest, Eldrazi Ramp looked absolutely great this weekend, and when I got to play it on streams, definitely follow me on twitch.tv/Friday23. It was a deck that I thought would kind of run out of gas pretty easily, and I definitely had plenty of times where I could just kind of cast and do some pretty neat things to just kind of extend the game longer, and even some ways to very quickly end the game. So it was definitely really cool getting to play that deck, and I didn't give it enough credit, and I'm going to give it its flowers now. This is an absolutely amazing deck to be playing currently in the format. Grinding Breach, doing breach things, definitely making me regret saying that like Faithless Looting was going to be one of the best cards, because it turns out Mox Opal might just be one of the best cards. Really, the only Mox Opal deck that is here is a Grinding Station, and it's a good one. So maybe you can make the argument that something else from that deck, maybe Grinding Breach, just shouldn't exist, period. But of all the banned cards, this, Mox Opal proving that it was one of the best cards, even if it is just in one deck. And then the rest of the metagame, kind of whatever. I think that if you're looking to win your regional championship or win a major tournament, you're probably just stuck on Boros Energy, Grinding Breach, and Eldrazi Ramp. While any of these other decks can kind of obviously get in there and maybe take a win from any of them, it just seems like in a vacuum that these are the three best decks going into the next set of regional championships. And I would expect going into the United States Regional Championship, where off the top of my head, I can't remember, I think February's is in Portland. I don't expect there to be, Dimir Oculus is probably still going to be somewhere like probably down in here between like the 3.5% and 9.5%. That's going to be, very vague, but I think when you go from like almost 11.5% down to like 6-7%, that's definitely going to be a big hit to you. And of course, we're just going to see more of the energy, breach, and ramp kind of metagame. But that's going to do it for kind of our like wrap up about the metagame for day 1 and day 2. Let's go ahead and check out the standings of the tournament and look at our top 8 of that event, and hopefully this will kind of give us some closure and actually give us some questions going into the next set of regional championships going to be taking place over the next about month and a half. So here is our standings from the event. We have Alexander Rohan, who ended up winning the event with Temur Breach. This, again, I believe that Temur Breach was going to win at least one regional championship. The potential for multiple, obviously, has a very good chance of winning multiple regional championships. I'm not exactly sure of the results of the other regional championships that took place, because I believe there was one in Canada that was also taking place, and another one somewhere else I can't remember off the top of my head. But Temur Breach ended up winning the event, beating Eldrazi Ramp. Actually, it was for MTG, which they play in the Manatraders series quite a bit, and I think I've played against them a few times, and I think I've lost probably more than I've won, but I think I've won at least one time, so I'm going to hold on to that as best as I can, because there's a reason why they're, in the finals of a regional championship, and I'm at home talking to you all through a computer screen, but, hi, hello, how you doing? We also have a few other, 3 more Boros Energy decks here, making the semifinals, 2 of them, and of course, Lorenzo Polion being the lone quarterfinal finisher for the energy deck. So 3 energy decks in top 8, Eldrazi Ramp, Temur Breach. We have a mono green Brood-Scale deck, which is super interesting, to say the least, because this deck is absolutely crazy. You end up being able to, I believe, make infinite Eldrazi's with like Brood-Scale, and then you can play like a Walking Ballista and kill your opponent, which is pretty neat there. You have Callum Laird, who's playing Temur Breach, and Hooter, I'm not even going to attempt to say the last name, also playing Temur Breach. So to kind of summarize this, we had 3 Temur Breach decks, 3 Boros Energy decks, Eldrazi Ramp, and a mono green Brood-Scale as your top 8. Absolutely dominant, from not the fact that we have 2 different decks that put 3 different decks, or 2 different archetypes that put 3 players into the top 8 each is absolutely insane. On the outside looking in, crazy enough, Domain Zoo and 4-color Breach there at 9 and 10. Another Boros Energy player, 2 Eldrazi Ramp decks, Teamer Breach, Boros Energy, and Eldrazi Ramp to round out the top 16. So it looks like Eldrazi Ramp also performed very well, only putting one in the top 8, but putting quite a few players into the top 16. So definitely a very good and respectable finish there. Decent amount of Boros Energy in here as well. And it looks like a lot of the players that were playing Breach, I mean, we had, 3 players in the top 8, and we had 4 in the top 10, which is really sweet here, and then another one at 14th place. So definitely really neat. We go further down, we go to like the top 25. We're seeing more Eldrazi Ramp, more Teamer Breach, Orzhov Blink deck actually getting at 21st place. Eldrazi Ramp 20th. Jund Sagavan, which is an absolutely insane deck, ended up actually performing way better than any of the Splinter Twin decks, so I think it just means that Splinter Twin is only going to be good in Modern if we get it for another 5 to 10 years, which looks like it's going to just be a mainstay of the format. And Tameshi Belcher here at 18th. So definitely a pretty top-heavy top 8, I would say. Obviously 3 Boros Energy decks, 3 Teamer Breach decks. These were basically the first overall most played deck in the format, and I think I think it was Bora, I believe, was the number 1 overall player going into the Swiss rounds. So at least I believe so, that they were the number 1 overall seed, and then lost in the semifinals to the Teamer Breach deck, and the other energy player losing to the Eldrazi Ramp deck. But yeah, the fact that the second most played deck, or tied for the second most played deck, and the I guess in both instances, the second most played deck, that they ended up putting 3 decks each into the top 8. This is crazy, because we knew that Breach was really good. We knew that Boros Energy was good, but it just seems like, at least when it came to finishing out and closing out the last few rounds of the event, these decks just absolutely took off and, made the most of every opportunity to end up getting players into the top 8. So definitely going forward in these events, one question is answered. We know that it's going to be essentially Energy versus Breach, and Energy already has some minorly decent options for the Breach decks, but it's going to be seen if maybe there needs to be more graveyard hate, or exactly what the answers are. And that's going to be our first question: is what's going to be a good enough kind of hedge and enough sideboard cards potentially, and maybe even making some of those sideboard cards main board cards to give you a little bit better of a percentage against the Breach decks. Is what do we need to play, and what do we need to do, and how much do we need to commit to these Teamer Breach decks? Do we need to bring in artifact hate? Do we need to bring in just graveyard hate? What can we actually do to kind of tame what is going on here? Because I think Teamer Breach is only set up to get better and better. I think Boros Energy has kind of reached the ceiling of how good it can get. I mean, crazy to think that when you're over a quarter of the metagame in day 1 and day 2 and put 3 copies in the top 8, that you've probably have any more room to grow. I don't think that's necessarily a possibility unless there's a major breakthrough in the deck building that makes the Breach matchup in your favor. Then in that case, I think Boros Energy then just ends up being way too good for the format if it just ends up being 30-35% of the modern metagame. But I think that's going to be question number 1: is there going to be a deck that steps up that can beat Teamer Breach and beat Boros Energy with some consistency? And I think that is going to be the deck that kind of breaks out at one of these regional championships. The second question: is there enough hate and enough things that we can do against the Teamer Breach decks to slow them down? They have a plethora of ways to kind of win the game on turn 2 with a bunch of different backup plans as well, that it just seems like it's a deck that if you're not also disrupting them and applying pressure to them, they're a combo deck that can just kind of weasel their way into assembling their combo, or finding a way where they can just absolutely dump their deck into their graveyard and find other ways of winning the game with no cards in their library. Lastly, how good is this? Are these Eldrazi Ramp decks going to be? This one in particular was pretty cool because it was also playing Writhing Chrysalis, which people will tell you is the mythic common from the Modern Horizons 3 set, where this card, if it'll let me actually go over to it and maybe bring it up. Of course, we can click on it, but we can't do anything about it. But it was a very good card in the limited formats of the of Modern Horizons 3, and here it goes coming up. And this card was absolutely insane in these decks. So whenever you sacrifice another Eldrazi, you put a +1/+1 counter on Writhing Chrysalis as reach, and when you cast a spell, you make 2 spawns. So this gives you something else to do kind of on turn 4, or excuse me, on turn 2, when you have like your play of, you know, setting up your thing. You can then end up casting this, making 2 1/1s, and then this is going to have you set up for the potential to have 7 mana, which kind of goes into a lot of your other cards, or even just sets up kind of a one of your kicked cards that I can't remember off the top of my head. Sowing Microspawn, that's it. So that's going to be kind of the questions that we're going to be asking, and hopefully we'll have answers for by the time we get to the Portland Regional Championship hosted by Star City Games. Is there going to be anything that slows Breach down? Is it going to be impacting sideboards? Is there going to be a whole new archetype that can somehow spawn seemingly out of nowhere that can challenge specifically the Breach deck and maybe have a pretty good matchup against the Eldrazi and the Boros Energy decks? Is Energy kind of topped out at this point? Like, are they just kind of looking towards, you know, optimizing maybe their sideboards a little bit more and maybe hedging a little bit in the main deck against the Breach decks? Because it seems like that's going to be kind of a roadblock that they're going to have to find a way to navigate through. And how real is this Eldrazi deck? Because it seems like it's pretty real right now. Is it going to be able to keep up with the metagame? I think it has a pretty decent Breach matchup. I think it can close out games fairly quickly. I think if the Boros Energy deck doesn't have an absolute nut draw, that this Eldrazi ramp deck can just kind of overwhelm them by just, again, putting a ton of pressure on them and disrupting them maybe just enough to be able to win the game, even if they have a pretty decent draw from their deck. It also has a lot of good main deck answers for their just go wide strategy too. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how the metagame and how everything shakes out going forward. I definitely look forward to it. We're going to be doing a good amount of coverage for Regional Championship Portland. I definitely want to kind of make a day 1 and a day 2 / top 8 video for that. So if that's something that is you, I've done it for a few of the Pro Tours. I've also done it for the World Championship as well. And it's something I really look forward to doing, and something I really like doing is kind of breaking down the information here and kind of looking for answers for what we have going on here, because the modern format has been great. It's seemingly, you know, at least for a lot of streamers and a lot of content and a lot of my videos that are focused on modern, have been doing very well recently. And it's going to be a little interesting to see if people get tired of the format, if we're just going to be at like this 2 to 3 deck format, or if one of the other maybe unsung heroes can come in and even win a regional championship. Not saying that that's going to be the end of the world, where if they win, now all of a sudden they're going to be the most played deck in the format. Not saying that, but it will be interesting to see how the format kind of, you know, corrects itself to give some of these other decks maybe a better chance against the top decks in the format, and how the top decks of the format are going to kind of fight each other and try not to leave themselves vulnerable to maybe some other decks that end up getting, you know, a few percentage points in their favor in turn for them trying to get more percentage points again against, we'll say for energy's sake, against like the Eldrazi deck and the Breach deck. So that's going to be some things to kind of keep in mind and things to know. And with that, we're going to wrap up this video. Hope you always enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below what you think of the modern format. If anything needs to change, you want to see Breach thrown in the sun, energy was a mistake, any and all that stuff, you know, I do greatly appreciate that and getting to interact with the community. Of course, subscribe to the channel and check out the links in the description down below. Check out the my code for Manatraders if you want to kind of get into playing modern. You don't have to own any of the physical cards. This is a way that you can just kind of pick and choose and play whatever decks you want to play, and just kind of get a little taste of everything that the format has to offer. Of course, follow me on Twitch, and of course, join the Discord server. But that's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you all in the next one.